The silver tray vibrated against Maya's palm. She lunged. Her calculated stumble sent the tray spinning like a saw blade across the lounge. It clipped the mahogany table with a violent crack. Glass exploded. In the blur of the fall, her hand swept one glass to her chest and slammed another into Jinho's reach. Too hard, too fast. The bitter liquid surged upward as she hit the floor, forcing its way past her lips. "You clumsy bitch," Jinho hissed, his hand going for his holster. Then he stopped. He saw the tremor in her jaw, the dark veins rising beneath her skin. His eyes dropped to the glass in his hand. Untouched. Slowly, he looked back at the girl convulsing at his feet. Understanding hit him like a punch. She hadn't ruined the toast. She had taken it. Her pupils blew wide into black voids as her heart skipped, and Jinho realized the poison meant for him was already killing her. If she was sent there to watch him die, why did she just give her life to save him? Before we find out what Jinho does next, I want to see how global our community is. Drop a comment below with the city or country you're watching from. I'm reading every single one. And if you're hooked on this story of betrayal and golden blood, hit that subscribe button right now. You don't want to miss the moment Jinho realizes who this woman actually is. Park Jinho sat like a stone idol across the velvet-drenched Peace Summit lounge. He was the man whose name was whispered like a death sentence in the back alleys of Seoul, and he was seconds away from a lethal mistake. To a new era, the rival Dawn declared. A serpent-eyed man named Kang raised a glass of 1945 Romanée Conti. Maya didn't look at the men. She looked at the liquid. Under the flickering amber chandelier, the wine in Jinho's glass didn't ripple properly. It shimmered with a microscopic, oily, iridescent film that shouldn't exist in a vintage of that age. Digitalis purpurea mixed with a heavy metal catalyst. Her chemistry degree, the one she was currently burying under double shifts and grease-stained aprons, screamed a silent alarm. If Jinho's lips touched that glass, his heart would seize before the toast reached its conclusion. "Drink," Kang urged, his smile a jagged line of false brotherhood. Maya moved. She didn't walk. She lunged. She tripped over the corner of a Persian rug, a calculated stumble that sent her silver tray spinning like a saw blade. Oh, God! The tray clipped the edge of the mahogany table with a violent crack. Glass shattered, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the silent room. In the blur of the accident, Maya's hands were a whirlwind of desperate, hidden precision. She swept Jinho's poisoned glass toward her chest, masking it with her sleeve, while simultaneously slamming a fresh glass of sparkling water from her tray into his reach. But the momentum was too violent. As she hit the floor, the poisoned wine sloshed upward, drenching her face. A mouthful of the bitter metallic liquid forced its way past her lips. She swallowed. The world tilted instantly. "You clumsy bitch," Jinho hissed, his voice a low, vibrating blade. He didn't reach for her. He reached for his holster. The water glass she'd swapped into his hand sat untouched, mocking his survival. He looked down at the shattered remains on the floor, then at the girl trembling at his feet. Maya tried to stand, but her knees turned to water. Her heart gave a sudden, sickening thump against her ribs. It was a drum skipping a beat, then two. "I am sorry, sir," she gasped. The lie felt like lead in her mouth. Her pupils were already beginning to blow wide, swallowing the brown of her irises until only a black void remained. Kang stood up slowly. His eyes weren't on Jinho. They were locked on Maya, tracking the twitch in her neck. He wasn't angry about the spill. He was watching for the death rattle. "You should teach your staff some discipline, Jinho. She's ruined a $50,000 bottle." Jinho gripped Maya's chin, forcing her head back with a hand that felt like cold iron. He saw it then. The fine tremor in her jaw. The way her veins were beginning to turn a darkened, bruised purple beneath her skin, visible even in the dim light. "She didn't ruin it," Jinho said. His voice dropped an octave into a territory of pure, unadulterated menace. He looked at the water glass she'd swapped in. Then he looked at the rival Dawn. She stole it. Maya's vision fractured into a kaleidoscope of jagged light. The catalyst was working too fast. 30 seconds to cardiac arrest. She could feel her own blood thickening, becoming a sludge that her heart couldn't push. Jinho stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow over her that felt like a shroud. He didn't call for a medic. He didn't call for security. He pulled a suppressed Kimber .45 and leveled it directly at Kang's forehead. "The girl is dying, Kang," Jinho said, his thumb clicking the safety off, with a terrifying mechanical snap. "And if her heart stops before you tell me who gave her the bottle, I'm going to use your ribcage as an ashtray." Maya collapsed fully now. Her lungs burned as if she were breathing crushed glass. She clutched at the carpet, her fingers digging into the fibers. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to observe. She was supposed to report back to the private firm. She was supposed to stay invisible. Instead, she was the center of a war zone, and the poison was winning. "Search her," Kang screamed, backing away from the barrel of Jinho's gun. "She's a plant. Look at her eyes. She's a junkie or a spy." One of Jinho's lieutenants, a man with a scarred throat, grabbed Maya's apron, ripping it open. He didn't find a wire. He found a small, high-tech, translucent earpiece hidden in the folds of her collar. Jinho looked down at the device, then back at Maya, who was now coughing up a thin, frothy streak of dark blood. "Who are you?" Jinho demanded, leaning over her, his shadow blocking out the light of the room. Maya's hand reached out, grabbing Jinho's expensive silk tie, pulling him down until his ear was inches from her lips. She had one breath left before the paralysis hit her throat. "The back of the bottle," she whispered, the words bubbling through blood. "Check the vintage seal." She didn't finish. Her hand went limp, sliding down his chest. Her eyes rolled back, showing only the whites. Jinho didn't flinch. He grabbed the empty bottle of Romane Conti. He flipped it over. Taped to the bottom, hidden by the deep indentation of the glass, was a microscopic tracking tag. It didn't belong to him, and it didn't belong to the rival. It belonged to the National Police. "They aren't here to arrest us, Kang," Jinho said, turning back to the rival Dawn with a look of terrifying realization. "They're here to watch us die so they don't have to fill out the paperwork." Suddenly, the heavy steel doors of the lounge groaned. The sound of a tactical ram hitting the hinges boomed through the room, shaking the floor. "Security!" Jinho roared toward the ceiling. "Get the adrenaline. If this girl dies, we all die." He scooped Maya's limp body off the floor just as the lights cut out, plunging the lounge into a screaming, violent darkness. The elevator ascended 40 floors in a suffocating silence, the only sound being the wet, ragged gasps coming from the woman in Jinho's arms. Jinho didn't look at the blood staining his white silk shirt. He watched Maya's throat. Every time it hitched, his grip tightened. The doors hissed open into a high-security penthouse that looked more like a command center than a home. "Move!" Jinho roared. 3 medics in tactical gear converged on them before he even reached the central medical suite. They didn't ask questions. They knew the cost of curiosity in this house. They laid Maya on a cold steel table, the overhead LED lights turning her gray skin into a ghostly, translucent mask. He found the tracker, the scarred lieutenant, Kim, reported as he slammed a tablet onto the counter. The police were using a localized frequency. They were waiting for a heart rate to hit 0 before breaching. When you moved her, you jammed their signal. They're blind now, but they're coming. Jinho ignored him. He stood over the lead medic, a man whose hands were shaking as he prepped an intraosseous needle. "Is she breathing?" "Barely," the medic muttered. "The toxin is a neuroinhibitor. It's paralyzing the diaphragm. I need to intubate, but her jaw is locked." Jinho didn't wait. He stepped forward, grabbed Maya's jaw with a brutal, calculated force, and pried it open. "Do it now." As the tube slid down her throat, a small silver object fell from her mouth. It clattered onto the floor. Jinho picked it up. It wasn't jewelry. It was a tooth cap, hollowed out, containing a microfilm. "She isn't just a waitress, boss," Kim whispered, reaching for the film. "She's a professional. She was sent to watch you die and document the killer. Then why did she drink it?" Jinho's voice was a low growl. If she wanted me dead, she just had to stand still. He looked at the monitor. Maya's heart rate was a chaotic, jagged line. 60, 40, 32. "Boss, we have a problem," the medic said, staring at a rapid blood analysis screen. "Her blood, it's not reacting to the antidote." "Why?" The medic turned, his face drained of color. "Because she has a vanishingly rare phenotype. Renal blood, golden blood. The heavy metal catalyst in the poison is bonding to her red blood cells in a way I've never seen. If I give her the standard serum, it'll turn her blood to crystals." Jinho felt a coldness spread from his chest to his fingertips. He didn't believe in fate, but he believed in leverage. He pulled back his own sleeve, revealing a series of small circular scars on his forearm from years of secret transfusions. "RH null," Jinho said. The room went dead silent. Kim gasped. "Boss, you can't. You're the only source. If you give her your blood now, while the poison is still active, you're linking your nervous system to hers. If she dies, the toxin in her blood could backflow into yours during the exchange." Jinho looked at Maya. Her hand was twitching, a phantom reflex of someone trying to reach for something. He remembered the way she'd grabbed his tie. She hadn't been begging for her life. She had been giving him the key to his. "Hook us up," Jinho commanded. "Boss, this is suicide." Kim stepped forward, his hand on his holster. "The Syndicate will execute us all if they find out you're compromising the bloodline for a waitress." Jinho leveled a look at Kim that was more lethal than a bullet. "The Syndicate exists because I allow it. This woman knows who poisoned me. She knows why the police were watching, and she has the only blood in this city that can keep me alive when my own condition flares." He sat in the chair next to her, the leather creaking under his weight. He didn't look away as the medic inserted the large-bore needle into his vein. The tubing filled with dark, pressurized red. It snaked across the gap between them, a literal lifeline connecting the hunter to the hunted. As his blood entered Maya's system, her eyes snapped open. They weren't brown anymore. They were flooded with a terrifying fractured light. She looked directly at Jinho, her fingers curling around his wrist, her nails drawing blood. "Run!" She wheezed through the plastic of the intubation tube. Before Jinho could ask why, the penthouse windows exploded inward. Black-clad figures swung in on high-tension wires, the red dots of laser sights dancing across Jinho's chest. They weren't the police. They were Jinho's own personal guard. The betrayal wasn't coming from outside. It was already in the room. The world dissolved into a cacophony of shattering glass and the rhythmic thumping of submachine guns. Jinho didn't move. He couldn't. The plastic tubing connecting his arm to Maya's was a translucent umbilical cord, pulsing with the very life force his own men were now trying to extinguish. Kim, the lieutenant with the scarred throat, stood behind the line of tactical shooters. He didn't look like a subordinate anymore. He looked like an executioner. "Forgive me, boss," Kim said, his voice echoing over the high-pitched whine of the penthouse alarms. "But a leader who bleeds for a servant is a leader who has already fallen. The Syndicate demands a head that isn't bowed." Jinho's eyes didn't flicker with fear. They narrowed into slits of predatory focus. He felt a strange, cold vibration in his arm, the sensation of Maya's poisoned blood fighting against his own. "You think the Syndicate chose you, Kim?" Jinho asked. His voice was terrifyingly calm despite the red laser dots dancing across his forehead. "You're a middle manager. You're the man who cleans the blood off the floor, not the man who spills it. Kill them both, Kim," commanded. The shooters squeezed their triggers. Jinho didn't dive for cover. He reached out with his free hand and gripped the edge of the heavy medical table. With a roar that sounded less like a man and more like a wounded beast, he flipped the 300-pound slab of surgical steel onto its side. The bullet sparked and ricocheted off the underside of the table. Maya slid with the movement, her body tangling in the wires of the heart monitor. The tubing stretched taut, pulling at Jinho's vein, a sharp, white-hot needle of pain shooting up his shoulder. Maya's hand found his in the cramped dark space behind the steel barrier. Her grip was different now, not the frantic twitch of a dying girl, but the calculated pressure of a soldier. She reached up, her fingers fumbling with the intubation tube in her throat. With a wet, agonizing sound, she ripped it out herself. She coughed, a spray of dark violet hitting the back of the table. The vent, she rasped, her voice a shredded whisper. Behind the cabinet. Jinho looked at her. Her face was a mask of sweat and burst capillaries, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the room for tactical advantages. "You're a private investigator who knows the layout of my safe house?" "I'm the one who designed it," Maya said. She reached into the waistband of her torn trousers and pulled out a small, flat device that Jinho hadn't noticed before, a magnetic bypass key. She slammed it against the floor panel. A hidden compartment hissed open, revealing a short-barreled shotgun and 2 flashbang grenades. Jinho took the shotgun. He looked at the tubing connecting them. "We can't move far." "Then don't move," Maya said, her hand closing around a grenade. "Make them come to us." The gunfire ceased for a fraction of a second as Kim's team reloaded. In that pocket of silence, Maya pulled the pin. She didn't throw it. She rolled it. The grenade skidded across the polished marble floor and detonated in a blinding white flash. Jinho rose, from behind the table like a vengeful god. He didn't unhook the line. He stayed anchored to Maya, using his body as a shield for her while he unleashed a rhythmic, devastating fire from the shotgun. Each blast sent a traitor backward, painting the white walls of the penthouse in a gruesome, abstract red. Kim scrambled toward the exit, his face twisted in a mask of cowardice. "Lock the floor," he screamed into his radio. "Vent the gas. Kill everyone on the 40th level." The heavy blast doors began to grind shut. Jinho fired one last time, the slug catching Kim in the shoulder, spinning him out into the hallway just before the steel plate sealed the room. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire. The only sound was the hiss of the air filtration system, and then a new, sweet smell filled the room. "Cyanide gas," Maya whispered, her head lolling against Jinho's chest. The poison in her blood was slowing her reactions again, her system overloaded by the double hit of the Cabernet and the adrenaline of the fight. Jinho looked at the needle in his arm. He looked at the closed doors. He had enough air for maybe 3 minutes. She had less. He reached for a scalpel on the floor. He didn't cut the line. Instead, he sliced into the tubing itself, letting the mixed blood spill out onto the floor. "What are you doing?" she breathed. "Checking the chemistry," Jinho said. He watched the blood. On the marble, the red liquid began to bubble and turn a bright, toxic green as it reacted with the gas being pumped into the room. He looked at Maya, a grim, dark smile touching his lips. "You saved me because you knew I was your blood match. But you didn't tell me the rest. You didn't tell me that your brother isn't in jail for a crime." Maya froze. Her heart rate spiked on the monitor, a frantic, erratic beat. "He's the one who made the poison, isn't he?" Jinho asked, his hand tightening around hers. "And the only way to get the antidote is to find the man who's holding him." Maya didn't answer. She couldn't. Her eyes closed as the first tendrils of the gas reached them. Jinho didn't panic. He grabbed an emergency oxygen mask from the floor, but he didn't put it on himself. He pressed it to Maya's face. "I don't care who made it," Jinho whispered into her ear as the world began to fade to gray. "I'm going to find him, and I'm going to make him watch while I rebuild you." Darkness was not an absence of light. It was a weight. Jinho felt the cyanide gas pressing against his skin like invisible needles. He held the oxygen mask to Maya's face with a hand that had lost all sensation. His own lungs were a desert, screaming for a drop of air that wasn't laced with almonds and death. The blood on the floor, the mixture of his and hers, was no longer bubbling. It had turned into a thick, black crust. A mechanical hum vibrated through the floorboards. The gas stopped. A high-powered industrial fan kicked on, sucking the lethality out of the room in a violent rush of wind. Jinho didn't celebrate. He knew that in this world, when the torture stops, the interrogation begins. The blast doors groaned open. It wasn't Kim who walked in. It was a woman in a sharp, charcoal-gray suit, her hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Behind her, 2 guards dragged a man whose face was a map of fresh bruises. Maya's eyes fluttered open at the sound of the man's muffled groans. "Leo," she rasped, the word barely a ghost of a sound. Jinho stood up, his legs shaking, his hand still gripping the shotgun. He didn't recognize the woman, but he recognized the man. Leo was a prodigy, a pharmaceutical researcher who had vanished from the grid 3 years ago. "The widow sends her regards, Jinho," the woman said. Her voice was like dry parchment rubbing together. She finds it poetic. The man who designed the poison and the sister who drank it, all trapped in a room with the man who was supposed to die. Jinho didn't lower the weapon. "Who is the widow?" "She's the one who paid for your life," the woman replied, stepping over a puddle of blood. "And she's the one holding the patent on the only stabilizer that can stop your heart from exploding in the next 6 hours." Maya pushed herself up, her movements jagged and uncoordinated. She looked at her brother, Leo, whose eyes were wide with a frantic, silent apology. "You promised," Maya choked out. "You said if I watched him, if I reported his movements, you'd let Leo go." The woman laughed, a short, sharp sound. "We lied, Maya. You're a scientist. You should know that variables change. We found out about the blood. We found out that Jinho isn't just a target. He's the reservoir." The woman turned her gaze to Jinho. "Your condition, the chronic necrosis of your marrow, it's not a secret anymore. The Syndicate knows you're weak. They know you need her blood to survive the month. But the poison in her system, it's a transformative agent. Leo didn't just make a toxin, he made a bridge." Jinho felt a cold sweat break across his neck. "A bridge to what?" "To a permanent cure," the woman whispered. "But to get it, we need every drop of her blood. Not a transfusion, a total extraction." Jinho moved before she could finish the sentence. He leveled the shotgun at the woman's chest, but the guards were faster. A taser lead hissed through the air, catching Jinho in the shoulder. 50,000 volts surged through his nervous system, slamming him back against the medical table. His muscles seized. He watched, helpless, as the guards grabbed Maya. She didn't fight. She couldn't. Her eyes were locked on Jinho, a silent plea for him to do what she couldn't: survive. "Wait!" Leo screamed, finding his voice as they ripped the tape from his mouth. "If you take her now, the serum will fail. The catalyst needs a human host with a matching RH null factor for at least 12 hours to stabilize the protein chain. If you kill her now, you get nothing." The woman paused, her hand inches from Maya's throat. She looked at Jinho, then at the clock on the wall. "Fine," the woman said. "We have 12 hours. Take them to the vault." She leaned down, her face inches from Jinho's as he lay paralyzed on the floor. "You have half a day to say goodbye, boss, because by dawn, she'll be a shell, and you'll be a god." As they dragged Jinho and Maya toward the service elevator, Jinho saw a small metallic glint on the floor. It was the microfilm that had fallen from Maya's mouth earlier. The guards hadn't seen it. Jinho's fingers twitched. The paralysis was fading, replaced by a white-hot, singular rage. He didn't just have 12 hours to save her. He had 12 hours to burn the city down. The vault was not a room. It was a tomb of glass and pressurized air located 3 levels beneath the city's sub-drainage system. Jinho and Maya were thrown onto a single concrete slab. The walls were lined with biometric sensors that hummed with a low-frequency vibration, designed to shatter the focus of any prisoner. Jinho's hand was a claw, his muscles still screaming from the taser's aftershock. As the heavy pneumatic door sealed with a hiss, he forced his fingers to open. Inside, his palm lay the microfilm. He didn't look at it yet. He looked at Maya. She was curled in a fetal position, her breathing shallow and whistling. The dark purple lines of the poison had reached her jawline, mapping out her impending collapse. "Maya!" Jinho hissed. She didn't move. He crawled across the cold floor, his silk shirt now a rag of blood and sweat. He grabbed her shoulder and pulled her toward him. Her skin was burning, a fever of chemical origin. "Listen to me," Jinho whispered, pressing his forehead against hers. "I have the film. I need you to translate. Your brother." "He was tapping your wrist when they dragged us out. What was he saying?" Maya's eyes opened, but they were unfocused, the pupils jagged. "Morse," she croaked. "He was giving me the concentration. The stabilizer isn't a cure, Jinho. It's a detonator." Jinho froze. "A detonator? The widow?" "She doesn't want to be a god," Maya said, a shudder racking her frame. "She wants to be a ghost. If they extract my blood and inject it into you, the heavy metal catalyst reacts with your specific marrow condition. It doesn't heal you. It turns your circulatory system into a pressurized incendiary." Jinho looked at the glass walls. The irony was a bitter pill. He was being prepared as a human bomb to take out the very syndicate he had built. The widow wasn't trying to save him. She was using Maya's body to manufacture a weapon that would vaporize the entire board of directors at the next meeting. He unrolled the microfilm, holding it up to the dim red emergency light. It wasn't just a blueprint. It was a list of names. The deep ledger. Jinho's heart skipped. The first name on the list wasn't the rival Dawn or Kim. It was his own mother. The widow was the woman who had raised him in the shadow of the Mafia, the one who had supposedly died in a car bombing 20 years ago. The betrayal wasn't a coup. It was an inheritance. A speaker crackled in the corner of the ceiling. "You were always too sentimental, Jinho," a voice echoed. It was the woman in the charcoal suit, but the tone had changed. It was maternal, cold, and devastatingly familiar. "You survived the streets, but you couldn't survive your own blood." "Mother." Jinho's voice broke, a sound that had never escaped his throat in his adult life. "She gave you a choice," the voice continued. "You could have been a king. Instead, you became a host for a waitress. Now you will be the fire that clears the path for a new dynasty." The floor began to tilt. A section of the wall slid away, revealing a row of automated surgical needles, each one tipped with a shimmering violet serum. They weren't waiting 12 hours. They had lied again. Jinho stood up, placing himself between the needles and Maya. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have a plan. He only had the blood in his veins, the blood that was currently shared with a woman who had chosen to die for him. Maya grabbed the hem of his trousers, pulling herself up. "Don't let them." "Take it," she whispered. Jinho looked at the needles as they began to extend, their mechanical arms whirring. He looked at the microfilm, then he looked at the biometric sensor on the wall. The sensor didn't just track heart rates, it tracked chemical signatures. "If I die now," Jinho said, his voice regaining its lethal edge, "the reaction fails. The bomb never arms." "No," Maya gasped. Jinho didn't hesitate. He grabbed one of the glass-tipped needles as it lunged toward Maya. He didn't fight it. He slammed his own palm onto the tip, shattering the glass and letting the raw, concentrated stabilizer flood into his open wound. The effect was instantaneous. Jinho's vision turned white. His veins felt like they were being filled with molten lead. But he didn't fall. He turned to the glass wall where the cameras were watching. "You wanted a monster, Mother?" Jinho roared, his skin beginning to glow with an unnatural, terrifying luminescence. "I'll give you one." He slammed his glowing fist into the reinforced glass. The biometric sensors began to scream. The vault was no longer a tomb. It was an oven. The air in the vault didn't just heat up. It ionized. Jinho's pulse was no longer a sound. It was a rhythmic vibration that rattled the medical equipment in their racks. The stabilizer, designed to be a slow-burn detonator, was reacting prematurely with his necrotic marrow, creating a biological furnace. Jinho's skin pulled tight across his cheekbones, glowing with a ghostly, subterranean violet light. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a containment vessel for a chemical sun. "Back away from the glass," Jinho commanded, his voice sounding like grinding tectonic plates. Maya scrambled toward the far corner of the slab. She could feel the heat radiating off him, a dry, searing wave that made her sweat evaporate before it could bead. She watched in horrific fascination as the veins in Jinho's neck pulsed with a liquid that looked like neon fire. Jinho didn't use a tool. He didn't use a weapon. He leaned his shoulder against the reinforced 6-inch thick acrylic wall and pushed. The glass didn't shatter, it melted. The smell of ozone and burning plastic filled the chamber. With a primal scream, Jinho forced his arm through the softening barrier. The biometric alarms reached a deafening, glass-shattering pitch. On the other side of the wall, the charcoal-suited woman and her guards recoiled in terror. "Open fire!" the woman screamed, her composure finally fracturing. The guards unleashed a hail of lead. The bullets hit Jinho's chest, but they didn't penetrate. The sheer thermal energy surrounding his body caused the copper jackets to liquefy upon impact, splashing harmlessly against his skin like golden raindrops. Jinho stepped through the molten gap. He moved with a speed that defied human physics, a blur of violet light and redirected kinetic energy. He grabbed the first guard by the throat. The man didn't even have time to scream before his tactical vest began to smolder. Jinho flung him across the room like a discarded doll. The woman in the suit backed toward the control console, her fingers frantically typing a self-destruct sequence. "You're killing yourself, Jinho!" she shrieked. "You're burning through your cellular ATP in seconds. You'll be a pile of ash before you reach the surface." "Then I'll be the ash that chokes you," Jinho growled. He didn't kill her. He grabbed the console and ripped it from the floor, wires sparking and snapping like angry snakes. The lockdown on the vault doors flickered and died. "Maya, move!" Jinho roared, turning back to the chamber. Maya ran. As she passed through the melted gap in the glass, she felt the skin on her arms prickle from the sheer voltage Jinho was emitting. He grabbed her hand, and for a second, the pain was unbearable. A searing brand of heat. But then, something strange happened. The violet light began to flow from Jinho's palm into her arm. The dark purple lines of the poison on Maya's skin didn't just fade, they were incinerated. The stabilizer in Jinho's blood was acting as a broad-spectrum purge, using his body as a filter to clean hers. He was dying so she could breathe. "Jinho, stop," she pleaded, seeing the gray ashen color creeping into his eyes despite the glow. "You're transferring the load. You can't take it all." "I'm not taking it," Jinho gasped, his knees buckling as the initial surge began to wane. "I'm giving it back." He shoved her toward the open service elevator. The woman in the charcoal suit saw her opening. She pulled a hidden derringer from her sleeve and aimed it at the back of Maya's head. Jinho didn't have the strength to lung. He didn't have the fire to burn her. He reached out and grabbed the exposed high-voltage cables he had ripped from the console. The room exploded in a blue-white arc of electricity. Jinho acted as a lightning rod, channeling the entire building's power grid through his own hyperconductive body. The woman was blasted backward, her suit catching fire as she was thrown into the pit of the vault. The elevator doors hissed shut, leaving Jinho and Maya in the rising lift. The light in Jinho's skin flickered, dimmed, and finally died, leaving him in total, suffocating darkness. He fell against the mirrored wall of the elevator, his breath a wet, rattling whistle. Maya caught him, her own strength returning as the poison cleared her system. She held his face in her hands. Why? You're a Mafia boss. You don't sacrifice yourself for the help. Jinho's eyes found hers in the dark. His hand, now cold and trembling, reached up to touch the earpiece still clinging to her collar. Because you're the only thing in this city that isn't for sale, he whispered. The elevator stopped. The doors opened not to the penthouse, but to the middle of a crowded, rain-slicked street in the heart of Seoul. Across the street, a black sedan waited. The window rolled down, revealing a woman with silver hair and eyes that matched Jinho's exactly. The widow wasn't in the building. She had been watching from the curb the entire time. The rain in Seoul didn't wash away the blood. It turned the asphalt into a shimmering, dark mirror. Jinho leaned heavily on Maya, his weight nearly crushing her as they stepped onto the sidewalk. The violet glow was gone, replaced by a terrifying porcelain pallor. His skin was cold, not the cold of the rain, but the cold of a machine that had run out of fuel. Across the street, the silver-haired woman in the sedan, widow, didn't step out. She didn't weep. She watched her son through the tinted glass with the clinical detachment of a jeweler examining a flawed diamond. The window slid up halfway, cutting off the view of her face, leaving only those predator eyes visible. You look like your father when he died, her voice broadcasted, not from the car, but from the earpiece still pinned to Maya's collar. A grand gesture followed by a pathetic collapse. You were meant to be a weapon, Jinho, not a martyr for a girl who smells of cheap wine and desperation. Maya felt a spike of ice in her chest. She reached for the earpiece to rip it off, but Jinho's hand caught her wrist. His grip was weak, but his eyes were fixed on the sedan. Why, the poison? Jinho coughed, a spray of grayish fluid hitting the pavement. If you wanted the throne, you only had to ask. I didn't want the throne, the widow replied. I wanted the evolution. Your marrow was a failure, a biological dead end. I needed the catalyst to force your body to adapt or expire. And look at you, you adapted. You survived the vault. You've proven the serum works. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, moving with a fluid, terrifying grace. He wore a mask of high-tensile carbon fiber that covered the lower half of his face. In his hand was a pneumatic injector, similar to the ones in the vault. Maya's breath hitched. She recognized the gait. She recognized the way he held his left shoulder higher than the right. Leo, she whispered. The man didn't look at her. His eyes were vacant, the pupils fixed and dilated. He wasn't her brother anymore. He was a walking laboratory, his veins bulging with the same shimmering violet light that had nearly consumed Jinho. He is the perfected version, the widow said, the chemist who became the chemical. He doesn't have your sentimental weaknesses, Maya. He doesn't have your morals. He only has the hunger. The countdown began then, a sharp, rhythmic chirp from the earpiece. 10 at 9, 8. The stabilizer I gave you wasn't just a purge, Jinho. The widow's voice took on a mocking lilt. It was a beacon. The police are 10 seconds away. When they arrive, they won't find a mafia boss. They will find a terrorist and his accomplice standing over a biohazard spill. The man who looked like Leo began to walk across the street. Every step he took left a charred footprint on the wet road. The rain sizzled as it hit his skin. Run, Jinho whispered to Maya. He tried to push her away, but his legs gave out, and he slid to the ground, his back against a luxury storefront window. She wants the blood. She'll kill you to get the residue. I'm not leaving you, Maya said, her voice cracking. She looked at the approaching monster that used to be her brother. She looked at the police sirens reflecting off the glass buildings in the distance. She reached into her pocket. She didn't find a gun. She found the small magnetic bypass key she had used in the penthouse, the one she'd used to design Jinho's security. "You said you'd disdain the safe house," Maya hissed, her eyes locking onto a nearby manhole cover marked with the Syndicate's private fiber optic seal. "Did you design the city's veins too?" Jinho looked at the cover, then at the key. A spark of his old lethal intelligence flickered in his eyes. "The subsectors, the cooling lines for the servers, they run through the old bunkers. 3, 2, 1. The man who was Leo lunged. His hand, glowing with a fierce, unstable heat, reached for Jinho's throat. Maya didn't scream. She slammed the magnetic key into the electronic lock of the manhole. There was no explosion. There was only a sudden, violent depressurization. A plume of liquid nitrogen, used to cool the underground server farms of the Syndicate's data center, erupted from the ground in a blinding white fog. The street turned into an Arctic wasteland in a fraction of a second. The heat sink in Leo's body reacted violently to the sub-zero blast. His skin didn't burn. It shattered. The widow's car roared, its tires screeching as it sped away into the fog, leaving her perfected version to crumble into 1,000 frozen shards of violet ice. Maya grabbed Jinho by the collar and dragged him into the yawning black hole of the maintenance shaft, just as the first police cruisers screamed onto the scene. They descended into the dark, the sound of the city above fading into a dull, distant roar. "You killed him!" Jinho gasped as they hit the metal catwalk 10 feet below. "You killed your brother!" Maya didn't cry. She stood up, her face a mask of cold, hard stone. "No," she said, looking at the frozen hand she still held, the one she'd ripped from the manhole cover. "I killed the weapon. Now I'm going to kill the mother." The maintenance tunnels smelled of rust and ozone. Maya dragged Jinho onto a rusted steel grate, the sound of their ragged breathing echoing in the cathedral-like silence of the sewer. Above them, the muffled boots of tactical teams hammered the street, but down here, they were ghosts. Maya sat back, her hands shaking. She looked at the frozen, severed hand of the creature that had been her brother. The violet light was gone, replaced by a dull, crystalline gray. "The ring!" Jinho wheezed, pointing a trembling finger at the frozen limb. Maya looked. On the ring finger was a band of black titanium. She twisted it. It wasn't jewelry, it was a high-frequency flash drive. She pulled it free and shoved it into the port of the tablet she'd scavenged from Jinho's tactical vest. The screen flickered to life, bathing their faces in a harsh, blue light. It wasn't just a list of names. It was a ledger of every bribe, every assassination, and every cleansing the widow had ordered for 30 years. But at the very bottom, a file was pulsing in red. Project Ouroboros. "She didn't just want a new dynasty," Maya whispered, scrolling through the data. "The condition you have, Jinho. She didn't just watch it happen. She caused it. She's been microdosing your marrow for years. You were never sick. You were being cultivated." Jinho let out a laugh that sounded like dry leaves. "A garden. I was just a garden for her poisons." His hand suddenly gripped his chest. A violent spasm racked his body. His skin, once ashen, began to turn a terrifying, bruised black. The blood exchange was failing. His body was recognizing Maya's blood as a foreign invader without the catalyst to bridge them. "The bridge is breaking," Jinho gasped, his eyes rolling back. "You have to finish it, Maya. Take the drive. Go to the authorities." "The authorities are on her payroll," Maya snapped, her voice cutting through his despair. She stood up, the light of the tablet reflecting in her eyes. "You told me I designed the veins of this city. Well, the widow is a parasite in those veins, and I know how to flush a system." She looked at the ledger. The widow wasn't at a secret base. She was at the Peace Summit Lounge. She had returned to the scene of the crime to toast to her victory with the remaining Syndicate heads. She was going to present Jinho's death as a tragic accident and take the seat he'd left vacant. "I can't save you again, Jinho," Maya said, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "But I can make sure you're the last thing she ever sees." She reached into Jinho's pocket and pulled out a small glass vial, the remaining concentrated stabilizer she'd snatched from the vault. She didn't inject it into him. She injected it into the frozen hand's wrist, where a trace amount of the biological catalyst still lingered. The limb began to hiss, a toxic violet vapor rising from the dead flesh. "What are you doing?" Jinho breathed. "Chemistry," Maya said. "The heavy metals in the wine, the stabilizer in the vault, they all have one thing in common. They react to high-frequency sound. It's how the widow was going to detonate you." She looked up at the ceiling, toward the lounge 40 stories above. "The lounge has a state-of-the-art sonic security system. If I can override the frequency, I don't need a bomb. I just need to be in the room." Maya grabbed Jinho's suppressed Kimber .45. She checked the chamber with a cold, professional click. She wasn't the waitress anymore. She was the architect of the fallout. "Stay here," she commanded. "If I'm not back in 20 minutes, the ventilation will fail. Don't be here when it does." She didn't wait for his answer. She began to climb the emergency ladder, her movements precise and driven by a singular burning purpose. As she reached the top, she looked down at the drive. The deep ledger wasn't just evidence. It was the "why should I care" factor for the entire world. It contained the bank accounts of every politician in the country. She hit upload all to a public cloud server. "Let's see the world burn together, mother," she whispered. She kicked the sewer grate open and stepped into the service entrance of the luxury lounge. The music from the party above drifted down, a cello suite, elegant and oblivious. Maya walked toward the elevator, the frozen hand tucked into a silk napkin like a morbid gift. The doors opened. The guards didn't even have time to reach for their weapons before she fired. 2 shots, 2 falls, no dialogue. She stepped into the lounge. The widow sat at the head of the table, a glass of Romanée Conti in her hand. She looked up, her silver hair shimmering under the chandelier. "Maya," the widow said, her voice unhurried, "I expected my son. You're a disappointing substitute." "I'm not the substitute," Maya said, walking toward the table. She placed the napkin-wrapped hand directly in front of the widow. "I'm the consequence." Suddenly, the speakers in the room began to hum, a low, teeth-rattling frequency that made the wine in the glasses dance. The widow's eyes widened. She looked at the hand. The violet vapor was now a thick, swirling cloud. "You wouldn't," the widow whispered. "You'll die, too." "I've already died once today," Maya said, leaning over the table, her face inches from the woman who had ruined her life. "I quite enjoyed it." The frequency jumped. The glass in the room shattered simultaneously. The frequency didn't just rattle the teeth, it vibrated the marrow. The widow's glass of Romanée Conti exploded in her hand, staining her silver hair with a spray of vintage red that looked like fresh slaughter. "Stop it!" the widow shrieked, her hand clawing at the table as the violet vapor from the frozen hand began to glow with a blinding, rhythmic pulse. "The structural integrity of the floor, the bioagent, you're going to level the entire building." "Good," Maya said. She didn't flinch as the chandelier above them groaned, crystals raining down like jagged snow. The Syndicate was built on a foundation of poisoned blood. It's only fitting it falls the same way. The Syndicate board members scrambled for the exits, but the high-frequency hum had locked the electronic deadbolts. They were trapped in a luxury cage with a ticking, chemical heart. Maya felt the pressure building in her own skull. Her chemistry degree hadn't just taught her how to spot a poison, it taught her about resonance. Every object has a frequency at which it shatters. The stabilizer, when agitated by the sonic security system she had overridden, was reaching its breaking point. The widow lunged across the table, her fingernails raking across Maya's cheek. "You think you're a hero? You're a waitress who stole a life that wasn't hers. You're the reason Leo is dead." Maya grabbed the widow's wrists, her grip fueled by the residual adrenaline and the dying embers of Jinho's blood in her system. Leo died the second you put a needle in his arm. I'm just the one clearing the lab. The frozen hand on the table suddenly turned a brilliant, incandescent white. "Get down!" a voice roared. The service elevator doors burst open. Jinho stood there, his frame swaying, his skin mapped with black, necrotic veins. He wasn't supposed to be able to walk, but he was moving with a terrifying ghost-like momentum. He didn't look at the board members. He didn't look at the money. He looked at his mother. "Jinho," the widow breathed, her face twisting into a mask of false maternal relief. "Save me. Tell her to stop the frequency. We can fix this. We can fix you." Jinho walked toward the table, his footsteps heavy and uneven. He stood beside Maya. He didn't reach for the control tablet. He reached for the bottle of wine. "You told me I was a garden mother," Jinho said, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that harmonized with the lethal hum of the room. "You forgot that gardens eventually grow over the house." He poured the remaining wine over the glowing, frozen hand. The alcohol acted as a final accelerant for the chemical reaction. "Run," Jinho whispered to Maya. "Not without you," she snapped. "The bridge." Jinho coughed, a smile touching his blood-stained lips. "It wasn't just blood, Maya. It was a trade. I have enough of your golden blood to stay standing for exactly 60 seconds. You have enough of my monster to get to the roof." He grabbed the widow by the throat, pinning her to the chair. The widow's screams were swallowed by the rising whine of the stabilizer. Maya looked at him, the Mafia boss who had become her lifeline and the man she had been sent to destroy. She realized then that the deep ledger wasn't her breakthrough. This moment was. She turned and sprinted for the reinforced glass window. She didn't use a door. She grabbed a heavy bronze bust from a pedestal and hurled it through the glass. The vacuum of the night air pulled at her. She dove through the jagged hole just as the room behind her reached the god frequency. The explosion wasn't orange and red. It was a silent, beautiful sphere of violet light. Maya hit the industrial safety net 3 floors down, the impact knocking the wind from her lungs. She rolled to the edge, clutching the steel cables, and looked up. The top floor of the lounge was gone. It hadn't blown outward. It had imploded, a perfect vacuum of blue fire that had erased the widow, the board, and the poison in a single surgical strike. Silence fell over Seoul. The rain continued to pour, washing the violet ash from Maya's face. She climbed off the net and onto a lower balcony, her legs shaking. She was alone. The earpiece in her ear crackled one last time. "Upload complete," a voice said. It wasn't the police. It wasn't the firm. It was a voice she recognized from her childhood. Maya froze. She looked at the tablet. The deep ledger had been sent, but a reply had been waiting in the drafts. "Maya, if you're reading this, the garden is empty. Meet me at the shore." She looked toward the horizon, where the lights of the Incheon docks flickered. The story wasn't over. The damage was just beginning. The Incheon docks were a graveyard of rusted shipping containers and the smell of salt and diesel. Maya stood at the edge of the pier as the wind whipped her hair into a tangled web. The deep ledger had already detonated across the global news cycles. The Syndicate's assets were being frozen, and the name Maya was currently the most searched term on the dark web. She was the woman who had burned a dynasty with a single glass of wine. A pair of headlights cut through the fog. A black SUV pulled to a halt 20 yards away. Maya didn't reach for her gun. She didn't have one left. She only had the weight of the silver ring in her pocket. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was wrapped in heavy bandages with his arm in a sling. He walked with a limp that suggested his bones had been fused by lightning. Jinho. He looked different without the custom suits and the shadow of the lounge. He looked like a man who had crawled out of hell and forgot to bring his pride back with him. "The net," Jinho said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "You didn't think I'd let the only woman with my blood type fall that far without a Safety line? You imploded the room, Jinho, Maya said. Her voice was steady despite the tremor in her heart. I saw the vacuum. No one survives that. The vault was designed to contain a chemical sun, Jinho replied. He leaned against the hood of the car. I just used the same ventilation trick you used. I was in the elevator shaft before the pulse hit its peak. My mother was not so fast. He walked toward her, stopping only when he was close enough for Maya to see the faint, permanent violet tint in the whites of his eyes. The monster was still there, dormant but woven into his DNA. The ledger is out, Maya said. You have no syndicate, no board, no money. You're a ghost with a terminal condition, and you're a waitress with a chemistry degree and a bounty on her head that could buy a small country, Jinho countered. He reached into the back of the SUV and pulled out a small wooden crate. He set it on the pier and opened it. Inside was a single bottle of wine. It was unlabeled, dark, and still corked. He pulled 2 simple glass tumblers from his pocket. The police found Leo's laboratory notes in the ruins, Jinho said. He began to pour the dark liquid. It didn't shimmer, it didn't glow. It was just wine. He didn't just make poisons, Maya, he made a synthesis. It is a way for the Rh null factor to stabilize without the catalyst. It is not a cure, but it is a life. He handed her a glass. You saved the target, Jinho said. His eyes locked onto hers. You chose a death you didn't owe me. Now the world is going to come for both of us. The rivals, the remnants of the Syndicate, and the governments who want the ledger back will all be hunting. Maya took the glass. She looked at the dark liquid and then at the man who had become her unintended twin in blood and trauma. I didn't save you because I am a hero, Jinho, Maya said. I saved you because I knew if I let you die, I would be the only one left who knew how the poison was made. I was not protecting a boss. I was protecting my research. Jinho let out a short, dry bark of a laugh. The architect to the very end. He raised his glass. From now on, we only drink from the same cup. If you are poisoned, I am poisoned. If I bleed, you feel the cold. No more secrets. No more safety operations. We fight this war together. Maya clinked her glass against his. The sound was sharp and clear in the morning fog. To the damage, she said. They drank. The wine was bitter, complex, and untainted. As the sun began to break through the gray horizon of the yellow sea, the earpiece on the pier, discarded and cracked, emitted one final signal. It was not a countdown. It was a coordinates link to a private hangar in the north. Maya didn't look back at the city she had broken. She turned toward the SUV with Jinho following a step behind her. The waitress was gone. The boss was dead. In their place stood something far more dangerous. It was a partnership forged in the very wine meant to kill them.